I'll be reading the story based on the title. She returned to London a year after he broke her heart. The Duke saw her, and the room fell silent. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main characters. Eleanor Ashford had been away from London for a year spent in quiet solitude, far away from the city that had once held so many memories. The hurt, the betrayal, it all still lingered in her heart. The man who had once promised her everything had ripped her world apart without a word of explanation. And yet, here she was, stepping back into the heart of London, into the very ballroom where she had last seen him. The room buzzed with excitement as guests dressed in their finest gathered, but the moment Eleanor entered, there was a shift in the air. All eyes turned toward her, but one gaze, in particular, held her captive. Across the room, Duke William Ravenshade, the man who had broken her heart, stood frozen. His eyes met hers across the sea of people, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. His expression, surprise, confusion, regret, all flashed in his eyes before his usual composure returned. Eleanor's heart raced. She had prepared for this moment in her mind, but the reality of it felt so much more overwhelming than she had imagined. A year had passed, yet the pain of his abandonment still felt raw, as if it had happened yesterday. She forced herself to take a step forward, to move through the crowd, but her legs felt as though they were made of lead. She couldn't tear her eyes away from him. The memories flooded back, the laughter, the promises, the love they had shared, all of it now reduced to this one moment of frozen tension. William was no longer the man she had once known. The years had changed him, hardened him, and yet, his gaze still held a hint of something familiar. Something that made her wonder if perhaps he regretted what had happened between them. But then, as quickly as the moment had begun, it was over. He turned away, and the crowd parted, continuing with their conversations, unaware of the storm that had just passed between the two former lovers. Eleanor felt a sudden wave of anger rise within her. How could he stand there, so calm, as though nothing had ever happened between them? But then, she caught herself. What was she expecting? That he would run to her, beg for forgiveness? No, that was a fantasy she had let go of a long time ago. But still, the sight of him stirred something deep within her, a longing, a need for closure, perhaps even a hope that they could find their way back to each other. She pushed those thoughts aside as she made her way to the side of the room, trying to regain her composure. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her fan, but she refused to let anyone see the turmoil inside. She would not let him see how much he still affected her. Not now, not ever again. As she reached the edge of the ballroom, she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The night was just beginning, and she would not let him ruin it. Not again. As Eleanor moved through the crowd, she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone in the room was watching her, whispering behind their fans, gossiping about the woman who had once been the darling of London society and now returned as a figure of mystery and heartache. She could feel the weight of their eyes, but none of it mattered, not when he was standing across the room, looking at her as though he had never left her thoughts for even a second. Duke William Ravenshade's presence was undeniable, a magnetic pull that neither time nor distance had weakened. His gaze had never wavered since their brief exchange, and Eleanor felt her heart race once more, even as she tried to ignore him. She had spent an entire year convincing herself that she had moved on, that she no longer cared for him. But standing here now, in the same room with him, she realized how much of a lie that had been. The pain, the heartbreak, it all came rushing back. She had not moved on. Not truly. Not when the memory of his touch still haunted her, and certainly not when the weight of his absence had left a scar in her soul. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned slightly, her hand still gripping the fan tightly, and saw Lady Harrington approaching with a smile. "My dear, you look positively radiant tonight," Lady Harrington said, her voice dripping with politeness. "It's been far too long since we've had the pleasure of your company. I trust everything is well." Eleanor forced a smile, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. "Thank you," Lady Harrington. Yes, everything is well, she replied, keeping her tone steady despite the storm raging inside her. Lady Harrington eyed her carefully, as though she could sense the tension in the air. I'm sure you've seen him, she continued, her gaze flicking toward William. The Duke. It seems that time has done little to change him. Still as aloof as ever, I suppose. Eleanor followed Lady Harrington's gaze and found William still standing across the room, his eyes locked onto hers. The sight of him, so unchanged, so distant, stirred something deep within her, a mixture of longing and anger, regret and desire. She couldn't bear it any longer. If you'll excuse me, Lady Harrington, Eleanor said, her voice firm despite the emotions swirling inside her. I need some air. Without waiting for a response, she turned and moved swiftly toward the door that led to the terrace. The cool night air hit her like a wave, and she took a deep breath, letting the crispness of the evening soothe her frayed nerves. She walked along the stone path, her thoughts a whirl of conflicting emotions. She had wanted this moment, hadn't she? Wanted to face him, to finally see him again after everything that had happened between them. But now that she was here, she wasn't sure what she was supposed to do with all of this aching, unresolved pain. She reached the far end of the terrace and stood there for a moment, looking out over the garden, trying to gather her thoughts. She wasn't prepared for this. She had thought she was, but she wasn't. She wasn't prepared to look into his eyes again, to feel the weight of his gaze as if it could still burn her after all this time. She wasn't prepared to face the part of her that still wanted him, still needed him, despite everything that had happened. A sound behind her made her turn, and there he was. William, the Duke. He had followed her out onto the terrace, his presence as commanding as ever. He stood a few feet away, looking at her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. She took a step back, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. Eleanor, he said, his voice low and rough, as though it had been a long time since he had used it in this way. I didn't expect to see you again, not like this. She swallowed, her throat dry. You didn't expect to see me again? She echoed, the bitterness creeping into her voice before she could stop it. And why is that, William? After all that happened, you thought I would just disappear? His expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained guarded. No, he said quietly. I never thought that. I just never imagined that you would come back. There was a long silence between them, and for a moment, Eleanor wasn't sure what to say. The years of distance, of silence, seemed to stretch out in that space, making it feel like they were two strangers instead of the people who had once shared everything. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Why did you leave me, William? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question had haunted her for a year, and now, standing here in front of him, it felt like the only one that mattered. His eyes darkened, and he took a step forward. I never meant to hurt you, Eleanor, he said, his voice strained. I never meant for things to end the way they did. He looked away, his jaw tightening. But I couldn't be the man you needed. I couldn't be the man I once was. Eleanor felt a surge of emotion rise in her chest, a mixture of anger and hurt that she had kept buried for so long. So you just gave up on us? She asked, her voice shaking. You just walked away? His eyes met hers again, and this time, she saw the regret in them. I thought I was protecting you, he said softly. But I was wrong. I was a fool. I will never be the man you need, Eleanor. William's words echoed in the quiet of the terrace, and for a brief moment, Eleanor wondered if he truly believed that. She stood still, staring at him, feeling the weight of the years that had passed, the hurt, the silence, the things they had never said. The storm raged on in the distance, but it seemed to fade into the background, as if even nature knew that nothing could matter more than the space between them now. She had waited for this moment, longed for it even, but the reality of it felt different, much harder to grasp than she had imagined. You still haven't told me why you left me, she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. William's expression shifted, his lips tightening, and for a moment, he looked almost pained. I thought I was doing the right thing, he admitted, his voice thick with regret. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. I thought if I could distance myself, it would make things easier for you, for both of us. Eleanor shook her head slowly, feeling a lump rise in her throat. You thought leaving me was protecting me? Is that what you really believe? She asked, her voice quiet but sharp, cutting through the air between them. William looked at her, his eyes dark and full of emotion. At the time, yes, he said, his voice low, almost distant. I couldn't be the man I wanted to be, the man you deserved. I was broken, Eleanor, and I thought if I stayed, I would only drag you down with me. She felt a rush of emotion, a mix of anger and sadness that swelled within her chest. So, you abandoned me because you thought I couldn't handle your pain? You thought you were doing the right thing by leaving me to face mine alone. She took a step toward him, her heart pounding, but he didn't step back. He stood there, his jaw clenched, as though every word she said was another wound he had to bear. I was selfish, he said quietly, his voice strained. I thought it was easier to walk away than to face the truth. That I had failed you, that I had failed us both. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as the weight of his words hit her. She had never wanted him to carry the burden alone, never wanted him to think he had to protect her from the pain of their love. You never failed me, William, she said, her voice trembling now. I would have stayed, I would have fought for us. But you never gave me the chance. For a long moment, there was only silence between them, the storm outside now a distant hum against the backdrop of their conversation. William's expression softened, and Eleanor could see the conflict in his eyes, the regret and the longing, the desire to reach out to her, but the fear of what it might cost him. I never wanted to hurt you, he whispered, his voice cracking just slightly. I never wanted to be the one who broke your heart. Eleanor's chest tightened as she looked at him, her mind racing. There was so much she wanted to say, so much she wanted to ask, but the words stuck in her throat, caught between the past and the present. I know, she said softly, her gaze dropping to the ground. I know, William. But the truth is, I've spent the last year trying to forget you, trying to move on, and I can't. She lifted her eyes to meet his, and for the first time, she saw the raw vulnerability in his face. I can't forget you either, Eleanor, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The air between them seemed to crackle with the intensity of their shared emotions, and for a brief moment, Eleanor thought that perhaps this was the moment they had both been waiting for. But then she remembered the pain, the loss, the way he had left her without a second thought, and a wave of doubt washed over her. What do we do now, William? She asked, her voice small but full of uncertainty. What happens now? He took a step forward, closing the distance between them, but Eleanor held her ground. I don't know what the future holds, Eleanor, he said quietly, but I know that I don't want to live in the past anymore. I don't want to pretend that I don't still love you. Eleanor felt her heart beat faster, and for a moment, the anger, the bitterness, the pain she had carried for so long melted away, replaced by something else. Something softer. You still love me? She whispered, as though she hadn't dared to believe it was true. William nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. I never stopped, Eleanor. I never stopped loving you, and I never will. The words hung in the air between them, like a promise, like a prayer, and for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt something shift inside her. The storm outside had calmed, but in that moment, it was as though the storm in her heart had just begun to subside. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, she said, her voice barely audible. But I don't think I can walk away from you again. William reached out slowly, hesitantly, and when she didn't pull away, his hand gently cupped her cheek. His touch was warm, familiar, and for the first time in a year, it felt like coming home. Then let's take it one step at a time, he whispered, his thumb brushing against her skin. Together. It's been a week since Eleanor and William had their confrontation on the terrace, a week that felt like both an eternity and a fleeting moment. The time that had passed was full of unspoken words, lingering glances, and the weight of a history that neither of them knew how to carry. They hadn't seen much of each other since that night, except in passing at social gatherings, where their eyes would meet, and for a moment, everything else in the room would fade away. Eleanor tried to keep herself busy, filling her days with visits to friends and attending events she had once been so familiar with. But no matter how many distractions she sought, her thoughts always returned to William, to the way his words had shifted something in her heart, and to the way she had longed for him even as she tried to convince herself that she had moved on. Her mother had noticed the change in her, the way she seemed distant, even when surrounded by others. Eleanor, darling, are you feeling all right? Her mother asked one evening, her voice tinged with concern. Eleanor had paused, her hand resting on the letter she was reading, and forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mother. Just a little tired, that's all." Her mother eyed her carefully, a knowing look in her eyes. "I see. You've been working so hard at trying to forget him, haven't you?" Eleanor stiffened, her pulse quickening. "Forget who?" she asked, her voice too casual to be convincing. Her mother didn't answer right away, but simply studied her with those eyes that saw too much. Finally, she sighed and walked over to where Eleanor sat, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You know, darling, you can't keep running from the truth. You can't pretend that what happened between you and William doesn't matter. I've seen the way he looks at you, and I know you still care for him." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to deny it, but the words got caught in her throat. She had spent so long convincing herself that she was over him, that she had moved on from the pain, but her mother was right. She still cared for him, and it hurt more than she was willing to admit. "I don't know what to do, Mother," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can forgive him for what he did." Her mother's expression softened, and she squeezed her shoulder gently. "Forgiveness is not something that happens overnight, darling. But if you love him, truly love him, then you must ask yourself if you are willing to try. If you can look past the hurt and the time lost and see the man that he is now, and the man he could be for you." Eleanor sat in silence, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. She had always been taught that forgiveness was the key to healing, but could she forgive him for leaving her without a word? Could she truly trust him again after everything that had happened? That night, as she lay in bed, her mind raced with thoughts of William and the possibility of what could have been. The past few days had been filled with moments of hesitation, of wondering if she should go to him, speak to him again, and try to find some kind of resolution. She had never stopped loving him, but the fear of being hurt again held her back, like a shadow that followed her every move. The next day, she found herself standing at the edge of the garden at Briarwood House, looking out at the rows of flowers that bloomed in the early spring sun. The breeze was gentle, the sky clear and blue, but the peace she had once felt in these moments seemed out of reach. She knew what she had to do. She had to face him, face the past, and decide if they could move forward together. She could not keep hiding from the truth. Taking a deep breath, she turned toward the house and made her way inside. She had not yet spoken to William in days, but she knew that if she was ever going to heal, she had to face him. She had to confront the part of her that still loved him and the part of her that feared him, all in one. As she entered the drawing room, she saw him standing near the window, looking out at the garden. He hadn't noticed her yet, and for a moment, she simply stood there, watching him, trying to steady her racing heart. Finally, he turned, his eyes locking onto hers, and the silence between them was deafening. He looked as though he had been waiting for her, as though he knew this moment would come. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch in her throat. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice low, as if he were afraid to speak too loudly. "I wasn't sure you would come." Eleanor took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm here," she said quietly, "and I think it's time we talked." It's been a week since Eleanor and William had their confrontation, and though the days passed, the unresolved tension between them lingered like a heavy fog. Eleanor had tried to distract herself, burying herself in social gatherings, in meetings with friends, in the rhythm of daily life. But every step, every glance from William when they crossed paths in the halls of Briarwood House or in public events, felt like a reminder of the heartache she had buried deep within her. She had told herself that she would not let him in again, that she would not allow herself to feel vulnerable in the face of the man who had once promised her everything, only to break her heart without a word. But as much as she fought it, the truth kept resurfacing. She still loved him. One afternoon, Eleanor found herself walking in the garden, trying to clear her thoughts. The sun was high, and the flowers in bloom were a reminder of the new beginnings of spring, but Eleanor felt as though she were stuck in the winter of her own heart, waiting for the thaw. It was then, as she wandered through the maze of blooming roses, that she heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind her. She turned, and there he was, William. His face was softer than she remembered, though the usual determination in his eyes still held firm. He stopped a few feet away from her, his expression uncertain, as if he wasn't sure whether to approach or wait for her to make the first move. "Eleanor," he said her name softly, as though it were a question. She stood frozen for a moment, the air between them thick with everything they had never said. "William," she replied, her voice betraying the calm she tried to maintain. "You're still avoiding me," he said quietly, his eyes searching hers. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. It was true. She had avoided him, avoided facing what had happened between them. But how could she face it? How could she face him when the wounds were still so raw? "I'm not avoiding you," she said, though the words felt hollow. She didn't know how to finish the sentence. "Just what?" William asked, taking a step closer, his voice almost pleading now. "Just trying to figure out where we go from here." Eleanor met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what he was asking, and she knew what she needed to decide. Was she ready to forgive him? Was she ready to let him back into her life, despite everything? She took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking. "I don't know if I can forgive you, William," she said, the words heavy on her tongue. "What you did, how you left me, it hurt more than you could ever understand." William's face tightened, but he nodded, accepting the truth of her words. "I know," he said quietly. "I know I hurt you. I've been living with that every day since I walked away." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in days. She saw the pain in his eyes, the regret, the sorrow, and for a brief moment, she wondered if it had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. She had never wanted him to feel pain, to feel the weight of the choices he had made. But seeing him now, after all this time, she wasn't sure what to feel. "Why did you leave me?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. William's gaze softened, and for a moment, he seemed to struggle with the right words. "I thought I was protecting you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought if I stayed, I would only drag you down with me. I was lost, Eleanor. I didn't know how to be the man you needed me to be. I didn't know how to fix myself, and I didn't want to hurt you anymore." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She had never understood why he had left, why he had given up on them. And now, hearing his explanation, she didn't know if it made things clearer or more complicated. "You hurt me more by leaving," she said quietly, the words almost breaking her. "You should have stayed. We could have figured it out together." William's eyes met hers, and there was an intensity there, a longing that she hadn't seen before. "I wish I could go back and undo it all, Eleanor. I wish I could fix everything, but I can't. All I can do now is tell you how sorry I am." The silence between them stretched out, but it wasn't the same silence that had weighed them down before. This time, it was different. There was an unspoken understanding in the air, a recognition of the pain they both carried, but also of the possibility of something more. "So what now?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady. "What happens now?" William looked at her, and for the first time since they had spoken, he reached out a hand toward her, slowly, almost hesitantly. "Now, I ask you to give me a chance," he said, his voice full of emotion. "To show you that I can be the man you deserve, the man I should have been all along." Eleanor's heart fluttered in her chest as she looked at him, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. Could she trust him again? Could she allow herself to love him after everything? She didn't have the answers, but in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't ready to give up on him. Not yet. "I'm not sure what the future holds," Eleanor said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "But I'm willing to find out. Together." William smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile, and for the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope in her chest. They didn't know what the future would bring, but in that moment, they were ready to face it. Together. It's been 2 weeks since Eleanor and William made the decision to try again, to face the past, and build something new together. The weight of the months apart still hung heavy between them, but the air had shifted, a fragile sense of hope settling in where once there had only been doubt and anger. They had spent the past days in silence, at least in terms of unspoken words, but the quiet was different now, less oppressive and more like a calm before the storm of emotions that they both knew was coming. Eleanor found herself drawn to William more and more, her heart still guarded, but unwilling to shut him out completely. She had watched him over the past days, noticed the way his eyes would linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking, the small gestures of tenderness that made her heart ache. He was trying, she knew that, but the question remained. Could she ever truly forgive him for the pain he had caused? It was a question she hadn't been able to answer, not yet, not when the memories of his sudden departure still stung like fresh wounds. One evening, after a particularly long day of social events, Eleanor found herself once again walking in the garden. The late afternoon sun was just beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows over the manicured lawn. She had been avoiding this conversation for days, but she knew it was inevitable. She had to face the truth of her own feelings, or she would never be able to move forward. As she strolled past the rose bushes, the faint sound of footsteps behind her caught her attention. She turned, and there he was, William. His dark eyes met hers, filled with uncertainty and hope, as if he were waiting for her to say something, anything. She stopped, her hand brushing against a blooming rose, and took a deep breath. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "We need to talk." Eleanor nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I know," she replied, her voice steady but her heart racing. "We do." He stepped closer, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, almost too heavy to bear, but neither of them moved away. It felt like the moment of truth was upon them, the moment when everything could either fall apart or finally be put back together. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day," William began, his eyes never leaving hers. "About forgiveness, about trust, and whether we can build something out of what we had before." Eleanor looked at him, her gaze soft but filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "And what have you decided?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He was quiet for a moment, as though gathering his thoughts, and then he spoke, his words clear and steady. "I don't have all the answers, Eleanor. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. I want to try. I want to be the man you need me to be, the man I should have been before. But I can't do it without you." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat at his words. There was something different in his voice, something genuine and raw, something she hadn't heard before. "I'm not sure I can trust you again, William," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The pain, the uncertainty, it's all still there. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you for leaving me, for breaking my heart." William's face darkened with regret, but he didn't look away. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of his own guilt. "And I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Eleanor took a deep breath, the words she had been holding back for so long finally slipping out. "I want to believe you, William. I really do. But I don't know how to move past the hurt. I don't know how to trust you again after everything that's happened." He stepped closer, his gaze softening. "Then let me prove it to you," he said, his voice gentle but filled with a quiet intensity. "Let me show you, day by day, that I am worthy of your trust. I'll never stop trying, Eleanor." She felt the sincerity in his words, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that there might be hope for them. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know if she could ever fully erase the scars of the past, but in that moment, she made a decision. She would try. She would try to forgive, to rebuild, to trust again. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but she was willing to take the first step. "Okay," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Let's take it one step at a time." William's eyes lit up with a mix of relief and joy, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he smiled. It wasn't a perfect smile, but it was real, and it was enough. He reached out, gently cupping her cheek with one hand, and in that moment, Eleanor felt the distance between them shrink, felt the connection they once had begun to spark again. "I promise you, Eleanor," he said softly, his thumb brushing across her skin. "I'll never give up on us." She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing. This was the beginning of something new, something they could build together, piece by piece. Slowly, cautiously, Eleanor leaned into his touch, allowing herself to hope again, for the first time in a long time. It had been a few weeks since Eleanor and William had agreed to take things one step at a time, and although they had made progress, it was clear that the road ahead would not be without its challenges. The weight of the past still loomed over them, and there were days when Eleanor couldn't help but wonder if she was making a mistake by allowing William back into her life. But then there were moments, small and fleeting, when she would catch a glimpse of the man he had become, someone who, despite his past mistakes, was trying with everything he had to be the person she deserved. They had spent more time together recently, in the company of friends and family, and though there were still moments of awkwardness, there was also a sense of growing comfort. Eleanor had begun to see a side of William that she had never known before, a side that was kind, thoughtful, and, at times, vulnerable. She had not expected this change. She had expected him to be distant, cold even, but he had surprised her, day after day, with his patience and understanding. He never pushed her to forgive him, never tried to rush her into the future. He simply let her be, letting her heal at her own pace, and for that, she was grateful. But still, the doubts crept in. The past was not easily forgotten, and though William had made amends in his own way, Eleanor couldn't help but wonder if he was truly capable of loving her the way she needed. One afternoon, after a long day of socializing, Eleanor found herself once again wandering through the gardens of Briarwood House, her thoughts clouded with uncertainty. The late spring sun cast a golden light over the flowers, but Eleanor felt nothing but a deep sense of confusion. She had thought she could let go of the past, thought she could forgive William for the way he had abandoned her, but there were still moments, like now, when the pain resurfaced, raw and unrelenting. As she walked, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind her, and before she could turn, William's voice reached her. "Eleanor," he said softly, his tone filled with the same tenderness he had shown her since their reunion. "I've been looking for you." She turned, and there he was, standing just a few feet away, his dark eyes filled with concern. "I didn't mean to run off like that," she said, her voice tight. "I just needed some time to think." William stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I understand," he said gently. "But you don't have to do this alone, you know. I'm here." The sincerity in his voice caused her heart to ache. She had been so determined to protect herself, to shield her heart from the hurt she had felt. But now, looking at him, she couldn't deny the pull she still felt toward him. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I want to trust you. I want to believe that we can make this work, but I'm scared." William reached out, his hand brushing against hers, and for a moment, Eleanor felt the familiar warmth of his touch, the connection they had once shared. "I'm scared too, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "I'm scared of losing you again, scared of not being enough. But I can promise you this. I will never give up on us." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She had heard those words from him before, but this time, they felt different, more real. She looked at him, her heart torn between the love she still had for him and the fear of being hurt once more. "I need time," she said softly. "I need time to figure out if I can truly forgive you, if I can trust you again." William nodded, his expression understanding. "Take all the time you need," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving you again, Eleanor. I will wait for you, no matter how long it takes." The sincerity in his words made her heart ache, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to take that leap. She wasn't sure if she could allow herself to trust him completely, to love him without fear. But as she looked at him, standing before her, waiting patiently for her to make up her mind, she realized something. She didn't want to lose him. Not again. And so, for the first time in a long while, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just maybe, there was a chance for them, a chance to rebuild the love they had once shared. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Let's take this one day at a time, William. Let's see where it goes." A soft smile spread across his face, and for a moment, it felt as though the weight of the past had been lifted, if only just a little. He stepped closer, taking her hand in his, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Eleanor allowed herself to hope. They had both been hurt, both made mistakes, but maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make things right. And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor believed that their story was far from over. The days that followed were filled with moments of quiet understanding between Eleanor and William, though both of them knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. They spent more time together, walking through the gardens of Briarwood House, attending social events with the appearance of a couple who had never been torn apart. But inside, Eleanor felt the quiet unease of a heart that was still unsure. She had told herself that she was ready, ready to forgive, ready to trust again, but there were nights when she lay awake, thinking of the past, thinking of all that had happened, wondering if she was being too hopeful, too naive. William, for his part, seemed to understand. He never pushed her for more than she was willing to give, and he never asked her to forget the past. Instead, he showed her through every small action, every kind word, that he was willing to earn her trust again, no matter how long it took. They had shared the most difficult of conversations already, the ones that most couples never had to face. The pain, the abandonment, the trust that had been shattered. Eleanor had voiced it all, and William had listened, truly listened, without interruption or excuse. But the real test was yet to come. Eleanor knew that even though she had begun to let go of some of the anger, there was still so much healing left to do. She had never imagined that forgiveness would be so complicated. As the weeks passed, Eleanor began to feel the first stirrings of hope again. William's patience and tenderness had started to break through her defenses, and slowly, piece by piece, the wall she had built around her heart began to crumble. There were days when she could laugh freely with him, when their conversations felt easy and natural, as if the years apart had never happened. But then there were moments, brief flashes of doubt, when she would see the pain in his eyes, the shadows of guilt that never seemed to leave him. And in those moments, she would wonder if it was enough, if they could ever truly rebuild what they had lost. One evening, as they walked through the forest that surrounded Briarwood House, the golden light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the ground. William had been quiet for most of the walk, his hand gently resting in the small of her back, guiding her through the path. Eleanor had noticed the silence, the weight in the air, and she turned to him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What's on your mind?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper against the stillness of the trees. William stopped walking, his gaze fixed on the horizon for a moment before he turned to face her. His eyes were filled with a mixture of uncertainty and vulnerability, and for the first time in weeks, Eleanor saw the raw emotion he had tried so hard to keep hidden. "I know I've hurt you, Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse. "And I know that I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Eleanor felt a lump rise in her throat at his words. She had heard him say it before, but this time, something in his voice made her believe him. "William," she began, but he held up a hand, stopping her before she could say more. "No," he said, his voice firm, yet gentle. "I need you to hear this. I need you to understand that I am not asking for your forgiveness because I think I deserve it. I'm asking because I love you, Eleanor, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that to you." Her heart skipped a beat at his confession, and for the first time since their reunion, Eleanor allowed herself to feel something she had been too afraid to feel: hope. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, feel the depth of his words, and it was in that moment that she realized just how much he had changed, just how much he had been willing to sacrifice to earn her trust. The road ahead would still be difficult, filled with moments of doubt and uncertainty, but as she looked at him, standing there before her, with his heart laid bare, she knew that she was no longer afraid. She wasn't sure where their journey would take them, but she was willing to take the next step with him, to rebuild what they had lost and build something even stronger. "I believe you," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "And I'm willing to try, William." Together, a smile spread across his face, a smile that was both relieved and hopeful, and as he reached out to take her hand, Eleanor knew that they had both taken the first step toward healing, toward a future they could build together. There were no guarantees, no promises of a perfect life, but there was love, love that had withstood the test of time and pain, love that was now ready to be given a second chance. Months passed since that pivotal moment in the garden, and with each passing day, Eleanor and William's bond deepened. The wounds of the past, though not entirely healed, had started to fade, and in their place, new memories were being made. They spent their days together, learning how to be the people they once were, but with a new understanding, a deeper love that had been born from the pain they had both endured. They were no longer the same people who had walked away from each other a year ago. Time had changed them, and their love had changed too. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of doubt, of fear that perhaps the past would catch up with them. But there was also laughter, shared moments of joy, and an intimacy that had been absent for so long. William never stopped showing Eleanor that he was worthy of her trust, that he was the man he promised to be. He was patient with her, always understanding when the old hurt resurfaced. Eleanor, for her part, allowed herself to feel again, allowed herself to believe that love could heal, that love could endure. One evening, after a quiet dinner at Briarwood House, William took her hand as they sat on the terrace, looking out over the garden. The stars above seemed to shimmer with promise, and the soft breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. It was a peaceful night, a night that felt like the world had stopped spinning for just a moment. "Eleanor," William said softly, his voice carrying the weight of everything they had shared. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." She turned to face him, her heart skipping a beat as she saw the seriousness in his eyes. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. William's gaze softened, and he squeezed her hand gently. "I know we've been through so much, and I know that we still have our struggles ahead of us. But I also know that I don't want to spend another day without you by my side. So, I'm asking you now, will you marry me, Eleanor? Will you make me the happiest man in the world and spend the rest of your life with me?" Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, everything seemed to blur around her. This was the question she had been waiting for, the question that she had dreamed about, even when she tried to convince herself that love was no longer an option. Her heart swelled with emotion, a mixture of joy, love, and gratitude. She had come so far, and now, here they were, standing on the brink of a future that they would build together. She smiled, her eyes shining with tears that she hadn't realized were there. "Yes," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, William." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, but they were no longer words of uncertainty or hesitation. They were words of hope, of a future that had once seemed impossible but was now within their reach. William's face broke into a smile, one that was full of relief and joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as if he never wanted to let go. "I promise you, Eleanor," he whispered in her ear, "I will spend every day of my life making you feel loved and cherished." Eleanor held him tightly, feeling the warmth of his words settle deep in her heart. They had both been through so much, and yet, here they were, finding each other again, stronger than ever. The journey had been long, filled with pain and doubt, but it had also been filled with growth, forgiveness, and love. As she stood in his arms, Eleanor knew that their story wasn't just about the past. It was about the future they would create together. There was no going back, no erasing what had happened, but there was a way forward, a way to build something beautiful from the ashes. And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt at peace, knowing that she had found the love she had always dreamed of, a love that was worth fighting for, a love that would last a lifetime.